Thanks for joining me, gents. Ladies and gents, hope everyone's doing well tonight. A few tech issues as usual, trying to get this show on the road. Hope everybody's doing good. I was having some trouble there trying to get the different streams going. I was supposed to be going out on Facebook as well. Not that that's happening, not that I care at this point. Fuck Facebook. I never use it anyway, who cares? So I'm going out on, let me see now, YouTube, X, Rumble, Facebook, and Twitch. Well, Facebook just dropped, like I said, but all is going well. Back on the horse. A few people have asked me how I've been doing and what are the plans and so on. So the plan is to continue with the live streams, continue with the X spaces and so on, and build the brand. It's the first time I've had a home studio in quite a while now, in about a year and a half, probably even 2 years at this stage. So it's nice to get going with some proper equipment and such. Working off laptops and so on is not the way to go. I remember being in Dallas when I was in the States doing interviews, and it was terrible. You know, I used to drop people in it by having all these echoes and interference going along or in the background. I was living in this shoddy little place with bad wiring, and the mic used to pick it up and stuff, so it was a bit of a nightmare, but here we are. So yeah, tonight is nothing too serious, just going to get into some bits and pieces and kind of do a review of the last few weeks and what I've been up to, really, and just talk about some of the stuff I've been doing and so on. So I had Jeff Nyquist on recently, who is a specialist in communism and kind of geopolitical affairs. We had a few great discussions too, actually, and Jeff is very gracious to come on the show. Love talking to specialists, you know, love talking to people who have done all the donkey work, and people who make me feel like I'm a bit of a lazy bastard and I haven't really put enough work in. I've gone through plenty of books, plenty of research, but then you meet these characters who've been doing it for 20, 30 years. And they're just phenomenal amount of knowledge. So it was, I'll switch to a different view now and show you which one I am talking about. So it was, that's Jeff's website there. Go full screen. And it's Jeff Nyquist blog. I'll make sure I put the links in this afterwards. But he's a very, very good writer. Loads and loads of books. And like I was saying, an expert at what he does. And I had him for a couple of sessions, and then I was doing a few spaces here and there, trying to build up an audience, and did an Irish space as well with Kieran and Jane and some of the gang. Can't remember what they call it, Eric Kint, I think, something like that, which is a really good night. It was my first night back on the mic after quite a while, so that was good as well. Always good to reach new people. Let me just go through my browser. Tonight I'm going to just get into some bits and pieces here in my running order. So like I was saying the other night, I've been doing a lot of practice streams recently just to kind of get the equipment going and make sure I'm ticking all the boxes here. So my audio seems to be coming through okay. I'm going to monitor on the different profiles here on YouTube and X and Rumble for comments. So anyone listening, let me know if my audio is okay. And I got a comment there already on Facebook. A new so End of the Line Joel. I got a comment from End of the Line Joel on YouTube. A new book in the works. I don't know if I have the stamina for a new book. We'll see. That one took a few years of my life, but we'll see what happens. Maybe I was trying to republish that book. Actually, I'm trying my best. My publisher doesn't seem to be interested in redoing that, and I would like to either republish that or get a different publisher or somebody's willing to kind of work with me on that one to release a shorter version that's a little bit more compact. I mean, you know, international Marxism is quite a story, and trying to fit it all into one book is really, really difficult. But we'll see what happens there. What else was I going to mention before we get started? So anyone listening in, please do share and repost, all that good stuff. If you're listening on YouTube or X, just share around. Make sure you send it to wherever you send it to. Make sure they subscribe and etc. etc. And that's the housekeeping and what have you. Let me just sort out something here so we're all good. I don't want to be distracted with any of this tech stuff. Up to my eyes dealing with this the last few hours. So if anyone hasn't seen this presentation, I would highly recommend it. It's on my YouTube channel. It's the edited version of my presentation, Dallas, which was in October 2004, just before I left the States. And I said to someone on a space the other night, I was talking about how the reason why I went to the States and took a leap to Like I was running a successful business in Ireland, and I left Ireland because I had to finish that damn book, and I decided to take a leap of faith and went to the States. I was in Malta for a bit, then I went to the States, and I kind of rolled the dice. I got loads of interviews and such, but I really wanted speaking engagements to speak to American patriots. I did meet quite a few. I went to a few events in and around Dallas in particular, in Texas, and which is cool. Got to meet American patriots of all shapes and sizes and said a few words and stuff like that. But I really wanted some proper speaking engagements, and I finally got one at the University of Dallas, is what you can see in that image there. And I obviously the mouse is coming through. There we go. You can see the mouse coming through now. So I set all that up myself, of course, and arranged the whole thing, kind of wiggled my way in there. And the guy you see there, Liam Ritter, was kind enough. He was like the president of the Young Americans for Freedom, and he gave me that slot there. So, which was great, so I was able to finally get that done, because I appreciate not everybody's going to want to read a book nowadays, certainly not a long monster of a book that's 600 pages plus. So the presentation is a great way to an introduction into what is happening to the world right now, because it all comes back to Marxism and Marxist indoctrination. It's also the pinned tweet on my profile. If you're on X, just go to my profile on X, it's at Resolving Or. You can see the pinned tweet there. I'll leave it up there. It's like 11,000 views. I did have one up before that was up around like 40,000 or 50,000 when I really pimped that out. But then I took that down after a while, and another one's back up there. So it is kind of doing the rounds, which is the important thing. You're on X as well. Make sure you are listening on X. Make sure you follow me and all that. I'm trying to reach more people. What else was I going to say? So I had a great interview this morning with, review a couple of things I did as well. I did an interview this morning with Martin Murphy. I'll bring up his YouTube channel here. So make sure if you're on YouTube, you give him a subscribe. Just find his channel here. Yeah, that's the one there. So Rugger Murph 27, that's his channel, and we had a great chat this morning, really comprehensive discussion for about an hour and a half. He's actually a brilliant host, and he's just kind of getting things moving there, so make sure you go give him a subscribe. Really good host, really interesting conversation. I think he's promoting that might be gone out, or will be going out really soon, so it might even be there already, but I'll just take a look. Oh, there we go. So there it is there. So he's scheduled to have it play out tomorrow. It looks like 6 a.m. I don't think that's right. Just click on that. I actually never clicked in here before. I'm paranoid the volume is going to kick in. So there you go. Make sure you go and check that out. It was a really interesting discussion. I mean, I love doing interviews. I love being interviewed as well. The thing about actually find it easier to be interviewed, because you just rock up, the questions are fired at you and you just have to roll with it. I find interviewing people, especially the way I do it, I tend to do my homework and put effort in. It's a lot more work, and me being a lazy bastard, obviously I prefer being interviewed. So make sure you check that out as well. What else? Oh, something that we mentioned in that interview today was an audio piece I did a while ago, a few months ago, when I was bored. Before I started in my new job, I was bored and I decided to have some rants. And with me, as usual, I've had too much caffeine in the early part of the day, and great, thanks Paul at Talbot, thank you very much. Yeah, audio is perfect, thank you, appreciate that. These headphones are bollocks. There's something going on with the headphone connection to this audio interface, and I don't know what it is. Everything else is perfect except that, and I can't hear myself, or can't monitor the mic properly. So thanks for that, appreciate it. But what you can see on screen there is from an audio piece I did a while ago called Ireland and Globalism. Can Ireland be saved? Because obviously there's something going on in the world. It was done. When was it done? It was done 3 months ago. 3rd of November. There you go. I just sat down with an audio recorder, and I just sat there, had my coffee, sat there, just looked at the wall, and just ranted into an audio device. And there you go. That's how it came out, over 30 minutes, and just stuck that thumbnail in there. It's terrible audio and stuff. I was thinking of doing a cleaner one, just polishing up the audio so it sounds better. It wouldn't take me that much work. But I thought, what, I'll just rant about it tonight. I'll try and do hit the same points as I did back then, except video, so people can get it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip this part of the show out. I'm going to send it around to people and pimp it out like I did with that one a few months ago, because it was very popular, got a lot of listens. I mean, I started out being a radio man myself, doing community radio, and I've DJ'd and all that stuff like that. So radio is my first love, sort of thing. So I love audio, and I love good audio. That audio is terrible, but it's like a little mini podcast sort of thing, which is what I started out doing with Resolving Reality in 2018. But so this kind of came up in conversation. I'm going to just make sure that I hit my marks, and anyone just tuning in, of course, if you're on YouTube, send it around. I'm struggling to get subscribers, and the same with X as well, really struggling to get traction. So make sure you share this around, send it to whoever, get them in here, stick in a few comments. I'll monitor when I can, and so on and so forth. So any support is much appreciated. So what I was talking about in this video was, how you've got people in. First of all, to just anyone who doesn't know my work at all, the real problem in the world is Marxism and Marxist indoctrination. That is the main problem everyone should be concerned with, right? I already did the math on this back in 2018, and that's because of my background and different knowledge bases I have. I kind of had a eureka moment that if we want this madness to stop, we have to deal with this from an ideological level. There's no use in turning up at protests, doing speeches, and complaining about what's happening, or talking about fighting back and so on, if people don't understand what the source of everything is and what the real issue is. The problem is we have a massive portion of the world's population are brainwashed with one form of Marxism or another. It's all based on class struggle. It's all about having a better world. Everything from radical feminism, trans ideology, Black Lives Matter, all the so-called woke stuff, as well as the national and geopolitical stuff like having open borders, multiculturalism, diversity, and so on. It all comes from Marxism, because Marxism is against the idea of nationhood. It's about internationalism. It's about one world government. It's about having a socialist federation of the world. It's about having a world where there's no oppression, essentially. And this movement believes they can fix that. Obviously, it's quite utopian in its thinking. People like this feel like they're improving things, and so on. So they're the ones causing all the problems. But despite everything that this ideology has done, people still can't see it or can't even define it. And some people will constantly drag you into debates about what words mean and what really it is, or what's the difference between Marxism, socialism, communism, and so on. And we get into these discussions about words, and nothing ever changes. But basically, to talk about, I'll come back to some of the difficulties with this later, but to talk about Ireland, which is what I talked about in the video, I think that the chances of Ireland pulling out of the situation that's in is pretty much slim to none, right? Because you're up against a very powerful internationalist system that has, unlimited funding, hundreds of millions of people involved and so on. I'm not saying it's impossible. It can be done, but certain conditions have to be met. It has to be done a certain way. And the problem needs to be, if Marxism is not understood, and that's what's causing all the problems, it's very, very difficult to form any sort of resistance to that movement, particularly because they have this cult movement have a tendency of derailing, subverting, sabotaging nationalist movements before they even get off the ground. So you tell me, how are the nationalists or political right in Ireland going to get themselves organised when they're up against this group tied in with the state, and they're all on the same page, essentially, despite some little bitchy differences? How are you supposed to go up against all that when they're just going to derail what you are doing? This movement is, they're masters at destroying nationalist movements before they have a chance to get off the ground. And the Irish nationalist movement is very, very divided. But before I continue as well, it's not negative to do an honest assessment of where you are and of what's going on. It's not negative to do that. It's actually professional. If you want to succeed in business, or you're an athlete, or you're a comedian, or whatever it is, anything you want to achieve results and do well, you have to give an honest assessment about how you're doing and whether or not you're making progress. And even though some people say the nationalist movement in Ireland has kind of more people are involved and things are getting better and so on and so forth. Really, not much really has been achieved, honestly, has it? And I can already, some people, when they watch back this clip, they'll say he's being negative, or he's a subverter, he's trying to ruin, this is, we don't want to hear this, stick the fingers at the ears and so on. It's very childish. No, it's not negative to do a proper assessment. Nor also, it's a little bit naive to think that anyone thinks that things are automatically just going to work out. Again, that's not how things work. When we're looking at history, the goodies don't always win. And that's kind of difficult to face sometimes. Anyone listening on Facebook? Oh, good evening, Victor. How's it going, man? Great to see you back. Thanks again for tuning in. Let me know if the audio is okay. I just pumped up the mic a little bit. So I'm just, anyone joining late, I'm just talking about the situation in Ireland before I talk about anything else. So the goodies don't always win, so we can't make assumptions just because you're against globalism and you're technically right, you're morally correct to object to globalism, which I agree with. I agree that is the moral stance to take. I'm opposed to it. Any reasonable person should be. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And when you look at the history of civilizations going back in time on the earth, civilizations have risen and fallen many times before. Even in the 20th century, we had before World War II, we had the British and French Empire, the Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they started to either weaken or collapse entirely. Then you had the interwar period. Now, again, I'm not being negative, just stay with me, switch your emotions off for a minute. I'm just saying that things change sometimes in a way that we don't like. Things might change at demographic levels and so on. So I'm saying nothing can be taken for granted. And there's no use in just complaining about what's going on and assuming that this is immoral and that somebody or something is going to come and save us, or that automatically we're going to win just by continually going down the road we're going down. There's no substitute for fighting spirit, being tough, being resilient. They're all good things, but there's nothing like consciousness or true intelligence as a weapon, understanding what's happening and how to counter it in the most efficient way, mind you, the most efficient way of countering what's going on. So I digress a little bit. The real issue in Ireland then clearly is that the nationalist movement is not professional, effective, organised enough, powerful enough to change things. It's just the way the world goes when it comes to power. If there's power to be had, and if you want to take it from someone else or another group, you better find a way of doing that, sometimes including being more powerful. And the nationalist movement in Ireland is not powerful enough, and there's reasons why that's the case. We're going to get into that as well. So you look at, say, the Irish presidential election there in the latter part of last year, and we had the president of Ireland before was Michael D. Higgins. Thanks very much, Victor. Appreciated that. So you're going to like this bit, Victor, right? So the last president in Ireland was pretty much a leprechaun, right? Because Victor likes to call me a leprechaun bastard sometimes, don't you? Pretty much. You said in your mind anyway. So our last president was a full-on commie, Castro-loving leprechaun. He was replaced by Catherine Connolly, who's another lefty activist and so on. So it's just an indicator of the way things are in Ireland. And yeah, there's cheating and election rigging and so on and so forth. But that sums up what happens in Ireland, right? That's how many of them there is in the system and how biased it is. When you look at the population of Ireland, it's 5.2 million people in the Republic, right? 5.2 million in the Republic. And then what you would call the right-wing or, say, nationalistic movement is a fraction of that. No, a fraction. We don't know how big or small it is, but it's a certain portion of the population. And that itself is then broken into smaller groups, right? It's broken into smaller groups. And I'm actually going to find the video and play it with the sound off to kind of back up what I'm saying here. I made this video ages ago just talking about the dynamics. I'll just leave that going here. I'll just play it in the background so you can kind of see it. But so there's a fraction of, you can see here on the screen, right, looking at the, I'll get rid of that banner. There. You can see there in the screen. So people are either, they're either helping globalism or they're going against globalism to one degree or another. Those of us who are on the political right and we're anti, more nationalist and so on, probably more on that side. So when I say globalism, I mean internationalism, global communism. It's all the same thing. This is not the Overton window, right? I'm just saying it's another way of kind of describing it. We don't know what the numbers are in Ireland. I don't know how big the nationalist movement is. What I'm getting at here is The section of the population that is kind of right-leaning or nationalistic, that itself is fragmented into smaller groups, right? And it's a real problem in Ireland trying to get a nationalist movement organised. These little groups are involved. They're trying to get themselves organised and get some momentum, but usually there's kind of dramas or problems and they collapse or so on. Now, we don't know if that's because of leftist subversion or conspiracy, or they're just collapsing on their own. But I think that those tendencies within Irish people who maybe tendencies towards drama or divisions and complications and so on and so forth, or having a negative attitude, tends to cause that group to split anyway. Then on top of that, you have, I mean, as a movement in general, then you have the Marxist camp on the other side looking in on the outside. Now, they've got a long history of derailing and sabotaging nationalist groups. And in my opinion, judging from how much stuff that they know how to do, I don't think they've used hardly any of their tricks, because the nationalist movement in Ireland has been so bad at getting itself organised. Plenty of great people involved who I love, plenty of great characters, plenty of passion, plenty of intelligence and so on, but still those tendencies exist. But my big criticism, as I've been saying for a while, is that there is a terrible understanding of what Marxism is and what role it has to play. It's many things, including being anti-patriotism, right? So here's a little graph. I might as well pause it here of, people who are kind of the split in society, people in the middle. I call them the neutrals or the useless. That's a big portion of the population as well. We don't know how many people are in that group. People are apathetic. They just don't care. People who are lazy. People who are apolitical, right? Disillusioned. People just, are afraid to be active or speak up, or low self-esteem. Conspiracy types. People who think that the left and right doesn't really matter. It's all controlled by the elites or secret societies or the Freemasons or whatever. Spiritual and awakened types. I used to be a bit like that myself, head in the clouds, thinking about love, everything's going to work out okay, the immature, the hedonistic, the egotistical, right? The vaxxed, over-intellectual types. We need to get that group there over on the right, and to do that, you would have to try to make nationalism more palatable, more reasonable, not too extreme, more popular, more cool for young people. The group on the left, now, this is obviously very, very simplistic graph. People can be left on, they're not all full-blown Karl Marx wannabes who want to destroy the earth, but there is some of them in there, the nihilists and so on. But this group, many of them can't be reasoned with, and they're never going to come over to this side. So the key to victory is to bring people over to the right. Hope everybody's kind of with me so far. That kind of it sounds like theory, but I'm just assessing the situation as it is. But back to what I was saying. So looking at the political right in Ireland, has its tendencies, and it's struggling to get itself organised, and there isn't really any one stable nationalistic group. You could probably say the National Party kind of is, with Mr. Patrick Quinlan in charge. They had that leadership kind of struggle a while back with Justin Barrett kind of being ousted. So he was like the de jure leader. So he was a leader on paper, but not the actual leader. And apparently there was a coup, according to Mr. Barrett. And then you had Patrick Quinlan was like the de facto leader. Now this year, after the Electoral Commission was involved, now he is the actual leader of the party now, so it's his own thing, and there seems to be a certain amount of stability there, which is great. I think Mr. Quinlan runs quite a tight ship, so it's going to seem like there's quite a lot of stability to there. Good for him, no problem. Seems to be going good, but again, looking at the movement as a whole, there isn't any group that's powerful enough, or that's looking like it's going to have that kind of power to really affect change. I think that the like I said, the system that where people are up against. You're looking at the mainstream media, education system, civil service, elements of the police force, the government, the political left parties. All of them are all against allowing nationalists into power. And that's why it's going to be very difficult. Not impossible, just difficult, not impossible. And it can be done, but this is where efficiency comes in. You need to find a way to make that nationalist movement as powerful as possible, with as many people involved, to give yourself the greatest chance of succeeding. That's the main point I was making in this video back here. That one there. This one there. That's the point I was making in that one. I'll go back to that actually, just to go through my points here. So the maybe not. Let's fucking live on the edge here. I'll play that. So just let that play in the background. Different images there. But so that tendency, so the only thing that's going to work is that the nationalist movement is formed into a strong coalition, or there's one single group. Now, it even sounds funny. I sound ridiculous saying that, because looking at the way things have gone in Ireland over the last 10, 15 years, nationalism trying to get going, it sounds laughable that could be the case. You can't seem to get 10 people to agree to the same course of action in Ireland. And as I've been saying for quite a while, it's the problem is that there needs to be a universal, clean, marketable form of nationalism on the table. That something that's effective, but that drags as many people in as possible. Now, I'm not saying you should let go of your principles just to bring in numbers, but I would draw the line at certain things like National Socialism, which I talked about before, and I made a video about that a while ago, and obviously took criticism for that one, because, like I said, you're never going to get people in the middle from helping you, from moving over to this side, if you're suggesting anything that comes across extreme. If you lean too heavily into what people call ethno-nationalism, you say, Ireland for the Irish, I want 95% Irish people in the country in 5 years. Okay, good luck with that. You know, or 90%, or whatever idea you have. You know, maybe people aren't being so specific, but I don't think that, I understand what globalism is and mass immigration is, but I think leaning into ethno-nationalism too hard can actually backfire on you. And I don't think, you know, it's all well and good having your principles and sticking to them, but if you're going to be a fringe group or a fringe personality on the outside with no power, and you're never going to get large numbers behind you, then why do you have that belief? It's not intelligent, is it? So, you know, so kind of rounding off some of the things I talked about before I move on to anything else but what I was saying, I don't think it's hopeless. I just think that people need to get real. And there's a real lack of problem-solving intelligence in the Irish nationalist movement, from what I can see. Protests and speeches, waving flags are not bad things. They have their role to play, but expecting things to turn around by just throwing all your energy into that is not going to work. And I think that till the ideological problem is fixed, that nothing's going to change. And people usually pat themselves on the back for having different takes. Like some people would say, well, I'm an ethno-nationalist and they're a civic nationalist, and I'm not going to work with them. Or another group will say, well, I think the Jews are behind everything, and I'm going to talk about the Jews. He's not talking about the Jews, so I don't trust him. Someone else is an ethno-nationalist, and they think others are not nationalist enough, or whatever it is. And it's just these constant divergence of opinion, and that keeps the splits in the movement, and no group is powerful enough, and there's no powerful coalition, and things don't go anywhere, and it just goes on year after year. So, you know, so much more I could say on that one. About that kind of division and so on. But back to my other stuff then. So when I'm talking about, as I've kind of saying, that Marxism is like the main problem we have in the world. It drives woke. You know, it drives what people call woke or cultural Marxism. It's anti-nationalism. It's responsible for open borders. It's responsible for open borders. It does an awful lot of damage to society, and has been eating away at the fabric of Western countries for years and years. And when you talk to patriots or sensible people anywhere in the world, whether it's Australia or the UK, the US, anywhere, or any other countries like Sweden or Spain, or mostly Western nations, but not just restricted to them. But if you talk to Western nations, they'll all talk about the same stuff. We're having the same problems: open borders, trans ideology, the problem with Islam. All these things are just effects. You know, the control of hate speech and free speech, people trying to change the constitution, so on. You know, trying to get the young out voting. You know, the increase of activism on the streets. These are all just the effects of a Marxist infection in Western countries. And even now, as I've said recently a few times, and, you know, look, reality isn't pretty. It might upset some people. In my opinion, the so-called collapse of the West is not the end game. It's a step in the process. this ideology has been eating away at Western countries. It's always been anti-Western and anti-capitalist. It's been other things like anti-white people. The reason why is because white people apparently have been the big oppressor race in the past, which is a distortion of the facts. And that's why you hear stuff like white privilege, these critical race theory, critical theory, all that stuff is comes from Marxism, and it's designed to attack the West, attack Western culture, to break things down and rebuild it in their image, because the goal is to have a world where nobody's oppressed, where there's no classes, there's no hierarchies. We're all just good little comrades in this big global collective. That's what the European Union is part of. That's what the United Nations is all about. And there's other associated issues, like people very concerned about Islam right now, and rightly so. As I've talked about before, though, they're not equally dangerous. Islam seems to be dangerous on the surface because it seems to be more aggressive. And the holy books do say that it's okay to eliminate the kafir, the non-Muslims. So there is danger there, of course, but Islam wouldn't be a problem for Western countries if it wasn't for the fact that Marxism has removed the borders and pushes multiculturalism, diversity. It's anti-Christianity. It's create a vacuum, you see, a vacuum of power and a religious vacuum, and Islam is stepping in to fill that. And Islam, of course, has been a danger since the 7th century. The Islamic calendar starts in 622 AD. But it's not fair to say that they're both equally dangerous, because remember that we have the communist alliance on the horizon of Russia, China and North Korea. And these nations, especially Russia, for over 100 years, have been injecting Western countries, particularly the United States, with toxic Marxism. It goes back even further back in the 1800s, but the 1920s was a key point when this stuff was exported internationally, thanks to Lenin and Trotsky to a lesser extent via the Comintern. And this thing has been eating away Western civilization over decades. It's been destroying patriotism. It's been decimating military recruitment numbers. Now they're trying to go all DEI, equality and so on in the military. And the West has never been more ripe now for a takeover in many ways, economically, militarily and so on. That's what this is all about. People who haven't, I was like other people listening, where I was distracted by other things for years of my life, and I never really noticed this. I noticed it by a fluke in many ways, but it's all about global communism. The rest is all just smoke and mirrors. And unfortunately, even at this stage now, when you see, what happened with Venezuela, or what's happening with Greenland, or what China's up to in the South China Sea, Russia's in Ukraine, and all these other things are connected in with communism, people still can't see it. It's really, really amazing. It's really amazing. And the way around this is education. Like I always say, the way around this is people willing to make the effort to absorb the knowledge. Now, some of the problems I have talking about this is that when people say, when I say Marxism or communism or whatever, people don't understand what the terms mean, and they have certain ideas about what it is. And I'm confronted with this all the time when I'm doing interviews and stuff, unless somebody is quite knowledgeable, or they've looked at it from a different point of view. But the idea that it's just to do with economics is partially correct. That's one part of what this ideology does. You look at the screen, you can see the book, an image of the book here. You see all the different symbols. So these are all the different things that Marxism's involved in, but people might have noticed. So there's a syringe in the top left, right, which is a symbol for illegal drugs, but also for COVID. So as the political left like to legalize drugs, they have a tendency to push things which are degenerate and which are damaging to society in general. Also, you can see because it's more compassionate, you see, to legalize drugs. So people who take drugs are oppressed, basically. And the syringe also represents COVID, of course, which, when that happened, people, including myself, didn't know what to make of it at first. But then when we find out later the Chinese Communist Party was involved, it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. When you look at the Chinese Communist Party, they're incredibly powerful, extremely aggressive and ambitious. And COVID was in fact an economic and a biological attack on the West, because if you remember, during COVID, people were not allowed, well, in Ireland, people weren't allowed to go to work. they weren't allowed to open their businesses, you know. So it has a terrible effect on the economy. And on top of that, the state was giving away free money in the form of COVID payments. So that whole thing was just an economic attack on the West. If the economy grinds to a halt and free money's being given away, you know, it's just got the fingerprints of Marxism all over it. And the rest, okay, there's gene therapy and other stuff going on as well. There's a lot of sinister effects of COVID, you know, like miscarriages and so on, and people dropping dead and all sorts of problems. The other symbols is you can see the United Nations, Marxist entity, European Union, Marxist entity as well. There's the hammer and sickle. There's the fist of Black Lives Matter. There's the feminist one. The plate with the leaf on it is veganism, right? So the United Nations pushing these Marxist entities pushing the planetary health diet, you know, animal fat, animal protein deficient diets weaken Western countries, you know, which you don't want if you're going to be getting into a war situation with the communists. And you've got the boat people, of course, we all know what that means. The Americans less so. Their immigrants come in through the plane and by land. But then you have the trans one there as well, connection in there. So trans people are oppressed, and they also form part of the revolution. The one here is pregnant women, so no pregnancies. Marxism has had a massive effect, particularly through the feminist movement, in lowering the birth rates in Western countries. Over the last over 150 years, it's been progressively eating away at the idea of motherhood and family. And so this ideology, not only does it have quite a resume in terms of the death toll, it's killed more people in such a short space of time than anything else in human history. On top of that, it prevents life, you know, because of the birth rates in the feminist movement, the attack on the family, trans ideology, veganism. What does that do? They all have an impact on the birth rates. Trans creates sterility, tries to blur the lines between male and female. It's all connected. It's all based on the class struggle concept. The symbol just below where it says cult is, you can see the family. So it's attack on the family unit. The Marxists believed since the 1800s, not just Marx and Engels, but people like that believed that the family itself was an oppressive structure, that women were stuck in this horrible hierarchy where the man was the head of the family, and that also families created the problem with inheritance and private property, which the Marxists are against. They think that that's immoral, so attacking the family unit was a way of destroying inheritance. And I remember I saw a quote today from Friedrich Engels, one of the co-authors of the Communist Manifesto, who said that the emancipation of women was, part of that was putting them into the workplace, so they could be free, and that would then obviously lead to the destruction of the family unit, which would have the benefit to the Marxists of removing inheritance and private property and so on, because of course their goal is for the state to be the parent in a way. You can see the hat here represents universities. We all know the universities are pumping out woke. This has been going on since the late 1800s. There's been certain forms of Marxism being taught, socialism, Marxist socialism, and then it's progressively getting worse in the 20th century. On the left, you can see Mr. Karl Marx himself. The one beside it is Christianity. Now, I actually put up a post about Christianity. I'll come back to that in a second, but this movement is pretty much Satanism repackaged, and it's against Christianity. You don't have to be a Christian to appreciate this. I'm not a Christian. Globalism is coming for us all. Christians and non-Christians have to work together to stop this ideology destroying everything, but they certainly have a habit of making a beeline for Christianity. The primary reason for that is that it's a competing ideology with Christianity's got some very strong moral principles in there, which is why when you look at the 20th century, particularly from the 1960s onwards, the feminist movement was pivotal in destroying the influence of the Catholic Church over society by, pushing for divorce, contraception, abortion, all these things attached to the birth rates, and, to emancipate women. And the results are starting to become plain to see now. To the right of my name there is wind turbines. So the climate change movement is from Marxism too. It's about world government. It's about demonizing economic output. Remember that the Russians and the Chinese are not playing the climate game. They're happy for Western countries to blow all their money trying to go green, which you can't fight a war without an economy. So they've always been interested in weakening the West, pushing this climate change nonsense on Western nations. And in fact, the Chinese love to make money off this by selling solar panels, electric vehicles, and so on and so forth. So, this is all part of the plan. To the right is Vladimir Lenin. So I don't know which one of those guys. There's plenty of people involved in this, but they're definitely two contenders for some of the worst human beings of all time. So, Marx would have just been dead in the ground in 1883 where is it? Edgware Road, not Edgware Road. I forget where he's buried. It's in London, but his ideas didn't die with him. It was carried along by other people. You look at Vladimir Lenin, was one of the worst theorists who took it a step further, because Marx believed that there's going to be a spontaneous revolution of the workers against the rich. But Lenin was the one who came up with the idea of Leninism, it's called, the idea of having a proletarian vanguard, right, of having a bunch of Marxists in charge who would push society towards a revolution. So Lenin had the mindset, and I put this in the book, his mindset was people wanted a Marxist revolution. That's what's best for them. They just didn't realize it yet. And it was up to these geniuses like him to push people towards it, and the rest is history. Led to the Soviet Union, and once that got rolling, they exported things internationally, and that's when the world took a turn for the worse. So it's a quick summary of the cover of the book. And just to give you an idea of what this thing is tied into, but some things might not be clear from the image as well. Remember that you look at, say, Ireland, for example, people talking about mass immigration being the number one problem. And they're correct for many reasons. But why is that happening? It's happening because what Marxism has done to demonize the idea of nationalism. It believes that borders are immoral, nations are immoral, because they don't like hierarchies. If there's a hierarchy, somebody's being oppressed. So they don't believe in the idea of Western nations or third world nations, because that's unequal, you see. Somebody's being oppressed. The West made all its money from oppressing third world nations. So what's the solution? Well, we're going to break down the West. We're going to flood the West with immigrants. We're going to transfer the wealth from the rich to the poor. We're going to bring immigrants into Western nations. Because that's somehow fair and ethical, and it's all based on the lie that Western nations owe third world countries. It's a distortion of the facts. The Marxists love to cherry pick bits from history that don't make any sense. Certainly, the idea that the white race or Western nations were the only group, to oppress or enslave others is absolute nonsense. We're just going to go to some of the problems I run into when I'm trying to explain. Let's go back. I'm just going to play this in the background while I'm talking here. So some of the problems I run into when I'm talking to people about this, like I said, is their definitions for what this is are outdated. They think that communism is about the so-called communist regimes of the past, like Russia and China. Russia, Red China and Pol Pot's Cambodia and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's part of it. Or they want to talk about the economic stuff, right? About centralizing the means of production in the hands of the state. Yeah, that's part of it as well, but it's not the full picture. The same with woke as well. That's part of it too, yeah, the sociological stuff, what people call cultural Marxism, but it's not the whole thing. Now, people miss bits. They don't realize that it's about world government and about open borders as well. Another problem I run into is people blaming the wrong sources. So I like to scour social media to see what people are talking about, of course, like the rest of us, and always kind of studying and always paying attention to what people are saying. So people putting the blame in the wrong direction. So there's certain groups like, blaming like the globalist bankers. What does that mean? So there are certain rich characters in the world. If they're talking about like George Soros type, he's ideologically Marxist. Right, you look at the causes that he supports, like pumping money into Black Lives Matter or the trans movement and so on. You can tell them by the things that they support, where they are ideologically. So yeah, he's rich, but it's the causes that they support. So there's plenty of people in the world with money. There's plenty of people involved in banking and so on. But what's their ideology? That's the key. It's not the fact that they have money. It's what do they believe in is the thing. There's also the problem I've talked about a lot of Zionism, people talking about Zionism and the Jews, and this is a tricky one. After Israel was formed in 1948, the Soviets tried to bring Israel into their orbit pretty much and tried to control them. But it was in their interest essentially to start to ramp up hatred for Israel and the Jews. Israel and Palestine became part of a proxy war between East and West because Israel was formed in 1948 just as the Cold War was getting going, and it became like a part of the power struggle. There was a lot of territorial struggles around the world between the communist East and the capitalistic West, if we can call it that. And that's why Israel and everything that's going on there is part of that. One of the big giveaways, as you can see, is that the lefties support Palestine. If it's true that the Jews are behind everything and they control communism, then why are they controlling the Palestinian movement to attack Israel then? I'm sure there's a conspiracy explanation for that too. Why would they create this hatred for Israel and the Jews for their own benefit? It just doesn't make any sense. There's a much more simple explanation that Israel is as an ally to the United States in the Middle East, and that's why the international communist movement would like to see Israel suppressed or destroyed. That's why they help some of their neighbours like Iran and so on, because it's part of a proxy war. That's one of the things that people are missing. And as I've talked in my work in general, when you look at, say, Ireland, there's about 2,000 Jews in Ireland with a population of 5.2 million. The people responsible for participating in globalism in Ireland, whether they're involved with the government or the cabinet, the mainstream media, the NGO complex, or for the Americans, the non-governmental organizations who all push lefty causes, by the way, who get funded with these millions and millions of euro constantly. They're all Irish. Over 99% of all these people are Irish. They're not Jews. They're Irish. People, some Jews say they're Irish Jews. I'm talking about Irish people who are not Jewish make up probably over 99% of the people who populate all these organizations. But I was in that group as well myself, who think that the Jews are behind everything, and I had to progress or evolve out of that. But it's another cult. It's a cult that operates kind of attached to the political right in Ireland, and it's a problem in other countries as well. Teaching people about Marxism, I run into that problem constantly. I start bruising people's egos. They get upset. They don't want to talk to you anymore, or they try to have an argument or something like that, because they haven't been intelligent enough to understand that they haven't reached. They think that they're at the top of the mountain in terms of intelligence, which isn't quite correct. It's a major, major problem, and it's highly, highly divisive in Western countries. There's people talking about it on X right now on the spaces. It's very, very frustrating. And as I say, it does nothing to help the nationalist movement in Ireland get organised, to use Ireland as an example, and it doesn't make us get any better at understanding Marxism and countering Marxist brainwashing in society by just jabbering on about the Jews all the time. You're outsourcing blame when you should be looking at people around you. And the Freemasons as well is another example of that, drifting into blaming these other types of groups. It's a really bad habit and it should stop. There's also people putting blame in the wrong direction, like I talked about Islam earlier. Islam seems to be quite dangerous on the surface, but again, it's in the interests of the international communist movement to a degree as well, to keep people guessing and have them apportioning the blame to other areas. Meanwhile, Western nations are filling up with Chinese operatives, with Russian spies, and they're moving on with their war plans, while people in Western countries are scratching their heads and they don't know what the problem is, because they're confused. Yuri Bezmenov was a Soviet defector a long time ago who talked about ideological subversion. It was like attacking a country by confusing people, distorting their perception of the reality, so they can't come to sensible conclusions about how to defend themselves, their communities, their countries, and so on, because they're all over the place. And that sums up the state of affairs in Ireland and other Western countries too. You look at the ICE shootings recently in the States. How many people will tell you that's all because of Marxism? The liberals there, the Americans call them by the wrong label, but it was the same with BLM. There's shootings, somebody dies, they use it as an excuse to have more riots and so on. It's just Marxism. Look at how many people are talking about it, that it's Marxism. Very, very few. That kind of backs up what I'm talking about. Another habit I run into as well is that, say, if there are any Irish people watching who normally, and everybody's different, but there's some people talk about in they're mostly concerned about what happens in their own countries. They don't think they need to learn about anything happening on the global stage or what communism is. I think that's a massive mistake, because I talked about earlier, you're never going to get a nationalist movement off the ground and have it develop strength when you have this cult operating in your country who's going to derail you and subvert you and sabotage and so on. It's never going to happen. So when obviously being on social media is like a kind of a social experiment, isn't it? When you interact with people, and I'm very conscious of when I post or send messages to people, they might react in different ways. So I'm kind of studying people's reactions constantly. And that's one of the big problems I deal with. I'm trying to educate Irish people on the political right, or call themselves patriots, about this kind of stuff. They don't think they have to listen. They would rather talk about some protest that's on next week, or, oh, look, an immigrant committed a crime, or look, this person there thinks their kids are trans, or something like that. Not bad to talk about those things, but it's not going to get you anywhere. Like I said, people have to elevate their understanding of what the real problem is, or none of this stuff is going to stop. I'm just going to have a look at some of the comments there. Yeah, sorry, I'm just catching up now. Likened to a large society with autoimmune. Yeah. Highgate Cemetery, that's the one. Yeah, thank you, appreciate that. I was struggling. Yeah, that's where he has his little statue, where it says, what was it again? Oh, was it the philosophers only wrote about changing the world, or whatever the point, however, is to change it, or whatever. It's on his tombstone in Highgate Cemetery. Yeah, I mean, I liken it to a cult. Boyle said that, likened to a large society-wide autoimmune disease. Yeah, it's a mental illness. It's become like a mental illness, a fanaticism. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a cult movement. They can't be reasoned with beyond a certain point of indoctrination. That's why things are so difficult. This is a lot more than just about politics. There's a problem here with psychology. It's mental illness. I mean, you look at the Americans, like later on, I'm chilling out later, having a snack or whatever, I'll be listening to the American Spaces, and just, hundreds of people talking about this stuff, thousands and thousands, and they don't know why the country's being destroyed. It's because this movement we're up against is very good at hiding itself, repackaging itself, deflecting blame onto other groups. We're really, really up against it. And the frustrating part about my job is people are just so easily distracted, and they don't see how, say, my opinion is any different from someone else's. It's really quite extraordinary. Something else I just wanted to show you, it's about Christianity, something I noticed. So it's talking about like problems or things that I run into quite a bit, right, when I'm talking about this. Now, I have a whole section in the book, before anyone that kind of might get upset or offended about what I'm going to say. I have a whole section in my book where I talk about the pillars of the West, right? So about the things that give Western civilization strength. So capitalism, Christianity, culture, the traditional family unit. These are the things that the Marxists have been attacking for ages, which give us a lot of strength. And in these times, I don't blame people for wanting to be spiritual and, pray and practice their religion and so on. Of course, it's natural for people to do that, especially in these times. But I always say to Christians that it's important that, we'll actually put some of it in this post there. So there you go. So it says on the screen, right? So the ideology is mutated into several forms. So Marxist brainwashing has become more potent and insidious than ever. And we can see this satanic fanaticism in lefties, liberals, progressives all the time across the world. So though it's a contradiction and utter hypocrisy for a Christian to be also a Marxist cult member consciously, I have witnessed the indoctrination in people claiming to be Christian. This is quite extraordinary. I've actually dealt with people who call themselves Christian who are showing me signs of Marxist brainwashing. That should be an oxymoron, right? Because Marxism is essentially Satanism repackaged, and Christianity is anything but that. So I've seen that quite a bit, but here's my other point. Being Christian is a good thing, and Christianity is certainly a pillar of Western civilization along with the others, but having faith alone is not going to be enough. That's not an insult to anybody. I believe that God wants you to use your God-given intelligence to understand what's happening and to try to,
have a noble, perceptive intelligence about what's going on. It's crucial for people to understand this revolutionary ideology in order to combat it, and that requires effort and intelligence. People have to make the effort and also need to be intelligent enough to understand that this is the main issue. The required knowledge is not contained in Christian doctrine, something Christians need to keep in mind. There is a lot of useful stuff in Christianity that refers to all this problem, but because the nature of Marxist brainwashing, being a Christian alone is not going to be enough. And I'm aware of all the different books, but it's very important that people understand the brainwashing. I'll give you a very practical example of why, how it can help to understand Marxism when it comes to dealing with individuals. So I was talking to people in an Irish space about this the other day. We're talking about how to safeguard children, for example. The Marxist camp, the lefties, the liberals, progressives, control the education system, and that gives them a massive advantage. They're churning out activists constantly. They're brainwashing the kids with radical feminist stuff, with rape culture ideas, getting them worried about that they need to save the planet, teaching them stuff like that. White kids are privileged. All this Marxist garbage is being pumped into the soft heads of kids, as Vladimir Lenin would describe it. And so, how do we deal with that? How do we combat that going forward? Well, how are parents going to keep their kids insulated from this brainwashing or counter it if they don't know the language being used or the terms being used? Like, for example, in the schools, they're injecting the kids' brains with this idea of being a global citizen. Now, where have I heard that before? That's a bit weird, isn't it? Global citizen. Well, it comes from Marxism, the idea of us being all happy little comrades in a world collective, where the nations are dissolved, where there's no more races and no more cultures. We're all just mixed in a bag and we're all equal, and then we're all going to be somehow happier and have better lives. And no doubt there'll be a bunch of Marxists at the top, globalists, controlling all of this. So the indoctrination thing is the issue. Yeah, true. It's lamb chop. Yeah, welcome. Yeah, they don't know that they're brainwashed. This is the thing. You're dealing with people who they don't quite know what they are. Their brain has been wired up a certain way. I was talking about this earlier today in an interview, that we have to get good at judging people and what level they're at. There's a big difference between someone in their mid 40s or 50s who thinks that communism is the answer or something like that, or they're full on so-called lefty. There's a big difference between them and a 16 or 17-year-old kid who probably, just hanging out with their friends, or that maybe they've just gone to college at 18 or 19 or 20 or whatever, and they're absorbing some of this crap. There's probably more hope for them, because as we get older, it's harder to change our ways. So what I'm trying to say is anyone listening who's got the sense needs to learn how to use your discernment to figure out who is too far gone, who isn't, who's salvageable, and if you can get them over to the political right, or at least get them to back off with the Marxist activism, because this stuff is fucking poison, any form that it takes. Thanks for joining me, folks. Anyone joining late, and make sure you share this around. If you're on X, drop a comment in there, repost the broadcast. I'm going to do that myself if I can, and drop your comments in, any suggestions or wherever you want me to go with this. Happy to riff on whatever. Oh wow, so I just got a message on Twitch. Call me, I'm almost fucking emotional here. I think the audio is still good. Everything seems to be good tech wise, so that's all right. Yes, I'm just going to go back to my browser and just look at some bits and pieces here I wanted to show you. So I'll show you my reaction to a couple of things. So, by the way, before I forget, make sure you subscribe to Martin Murphy if you haven't done so already. So, I have to say now, and there's absolutely no reason for me to say this at all. He's a damn good interviewer. Very, very good interview today. It wasn't prepared. He said he would just go in off the cuff. I didn't send him a brief. He knows that I'm an author, and I think he knows about the presentation, but there was no prep gone into that at all. We just kind of riffed. He's a very, very good interviewer, and he deserves he's just getting going, but he deserves a hell of a lot more than 107 subscribers. So make sure you find his channel and check him out, give him a subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any videos, etc., etc. What else was I going to say? So I talked about this already, and I mentioned the left and right thing. So I wanted to play this one. Where's that video gone of that? What's her name again? It's in one of my folders here. Where was it? Solo stream. It was about that Spanish politician who was jabbering on about the immigrants and stuff. I can't remember her name. How about on my phone here? I don't want to give away too much on my browser, but yeah. So working with a couple of mice here as well. So let me know if you're doing okay, folks, in the comments and so on. Hope everyone's doing good. And, you know, like I said earlier, this is not, you know, it's not negative to do an honest assessment over what's happening. You know, it's not negative to do that. I'm trying. Oh yeah, Irene Montero on X. So we'll have a look on X here. Search and use the mechanical keyboard. Montero. Was it in video? We'll do it here. Where's my audio? Oh, Ricky Gervais. No, we don't want that. We want to hear from the horse's mouth. She does have a horse's mouth as well. I did have a better one on X, which was great. Can't see that. There we go.
Regardless of the color of their skin, migrants and racialized people to please not
Sorry about that.
Us alone with so many fascists. And of course we want them to vote. Of course we do. We have obtained papers, legalization already. And now we are going for nationality or changing the law so that they can vote. Of course. Hopefully, replacement theory. Hopefully we can sweep this country of fascists and racists with migrants, with working people. Of course, I want there to be replacement of fascists, replacement of racists, replacement of freeloaders, and that we can do it with the working people of this country, regardless of the color of their skin, whether they are Chinese, black, brown, with all the working people of this country.
Yeah, so there we have it, folks. Another mad lefty. So they kind of give themselves away, don't they, by the stuff that they come out with. So she's talking about, you know, okay, a lot of people have identified that they're trying to replace, you know, bring in a voting bloc. And we've seen a lot of that happen in the UK and other countries as well, where they're bringing in, same in Ireland, bring in people from other countries. A certain amount of those are going to be allied with Marxist causes, and they're going to, you know, prop up the regime and keep things going and support the political revolution. We know it's all connected, but how many people are pointing out that she's just Marxist? You know, Pedro Sanchez is the socialist head of Spain, and like pretty much since 1975, they've been you know, kind of going downhill. I'm not saying they should have Franco, but one of the things that were under control was the Marxist movement, and Spain has been progressively moving back to that. And that reminds me of something. I did put this in the book. I put a section in the book talking about how if you're going to stay in control of a society,
I want to ask migrants and racialized.
You're going to stay in control of a society. You need like a certain amount of strength and a strong anti-Marxist stance, because otherwise they come back, you see. So Franco was in charge till 1975, and he was executing Marxists right up until the end of his reign. But then after that point, when he died in 1975, then you just kind of have the creep comes back in. So we're not even at that stage yet. But my point is, going forward in the future, you're going to have this really, really hard stance on them, and not allow them to gain strength as a movement. And this is where I've said that it's going to be a real challenge for people, because they feel that, it's immoral, that you're taking away people's rights, that, what about human rights? What about free speech? People have to get this notion out of their heads, because remember, when these nutcases gather more power and they start being in charge, there won't be any more free speech. We've already seen that now. You see what's happened in the UK, and they've tried it in Ireland as well, with hate speech, hate crime bills, things like this. You see them starting to gradually take people's right to speech away. So my point is, they don't have any mercy for you. So why would you have any mercy for them? And the Yuri Bezmenov said it years ago that you should deny them their rights. I think there's going to be a struggle, because even if I talk to American audiences about this, they'll say, what about free speech, right to assembly, and so on? I actually don't agree with that for certain types of people. I think that the brainwashing makes these people so toxic that it's okay for us to take some of their rights away, or to stop them causing the damage that they do. Like, for example, we talked about, say, trans in the school, people pushing this nonsense in school, allowing teachers to teach kids trans ideology is just as bad as, can be as bad as assaulting a kid, physically or sexually or otherwise. You wouldn't allow them to do that. They don't have the right to do that. So I would be for, if we ever got control of things, being able to suppress people, stop them from causing damage in society like this. And I think a lot of people are going to have a problem with this emotionally. They again, I don't think they understand how the brainwashing works. The more you let these lefties get on the streets and protest, the more you let them organize into groups, start up NGOs, start raising money and stuff like that, the more it just spreads through society, like mind virus, and you never get a handle on the situation. And when all this is going on, people are telling me that my stance is too harsh, that what about human rights and what about free speech and stuff? No, there's a tremendous amount of naivete here, and it's not going to work. Anyway, folks, thank you again for joining me. No worries, man. Yes, Eric, again, thank you for your message. Appreciate you joining us. Thank you for joining me, folks. I'm just kind of, just keeping it easy going tonight, not an awful lot prepared, just riffing about a few things and enjoying myself here. So anyone joining late, it's my first time with a home studio set up in quite a while, so I've been really, really busy with other things, but trying to chip away at getting the equipment I need together and devoting any spare time to getting things up and running. So I have a few interviews lined up as well. Won't give anything away just yet, but two figures involved with the Irish nationalist movement. I'll be interviewing them shortly. Two people I have tremendous respect for. So as usual, that will be a live stream going out on all the different platforms. So I'm currently going out on YouTube, YouTube X, Rumble, Twitch, and I'll add some more as well. Anyone listen in the comments there, just want to throw in any suggestions for anything you want me to riff about, anything at all. I'll give you my opinion on that. Kind of hit most of the marks of the stuff I wanted to talk about for tonight, really. But Victor, I don't know if you're still listening or are you making food, but yeah, if you want me to riff about anything, just let me know. Make sure everything on my list is going here. Now, I might just actually play some of this to my own little reaction video. Right, so I'll go full screen. The audio's on. I just want to get make sure that Okay, that's coming through in the background. All good.
Welcome and thanks for joining me here in Resolving Reality. Before we get going, as usual, please do like, share, subscribe. Click the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. In this presentation, I'll be talking about the left and right political dichotomy. So let's get into it. Despite everything that's going on, a lot of people, they could be just people just social media, or they could be content creators, or even people involved in politics who don't really want to call themselves nationalist or don't want to politically align, even though it's obvious that the best way to oppose globalism is to have what we can call national sovereignty, or another way to call that is nationalism, the idea of a country and the people deciding what course their country takes, whether or not they have control of their borders, and whether or not their culture should be preserved, etc., etc. So nationalism is the best term we have for all that. Nationalism as opposed to globalism. So this part of the presentation is inspired by the fact that most people, many people are still not choosing this, even though clearly, tactically, it's the best way, the best road to go down. So a sliding scale. A person either supports internationalism, globalism, or opposes it to one degree or another. At this time, this is all that matters when we are judging people on political, geopolitical, sociological, or bigger picture issues. Since there are many combinations of personality, it's a sliding scale. On the left, those supporting internationalist globalism. On the right, those opposing internationalist globalism. And then we have all the variations in between. So we're talking about personalities here and mindset, psychology, not in a conventional sense. I mean, where do they stand when it comes to globalism? Do they hate it? Are they opposed to it? Do they care? Etc. Everyone in the world fits into this graph here. And at the bottom, just again as a reminder, globalism, quote unquote, what that really is internationalist, totalitarian, revolutionary Marxism, the whole world domination thing, the whole world government thing. It's all pretty much the same thing, which is internationalist, totalitarian, revolutionary Marxism. So here's a simple graph I made. And now, of course, we're talking about political ideologies and the political dichotomy. You could literally spend your whole life discussing this stuff, and often no two people have the same opinions, and that's part of the problem. You know, people over-intellectualizing things, or having the wrong attitude, or being lazy, or whatever it is, and getting confused with all these terms. So here's a simple table I just made up to explain what I'm talking about here. So you have got three columns, the left, the right, and you've got neutrals, brackets useless, in the middle. People who aren't contributing really at all to the struggle that we are in. So I'll start with the left-hand side. So on the top left, Marxist cult members, right? So I mean, that means anyone supporting revolutionary Marxism in any shape or form, whether it's feminism, whether it's climate change movement, whether it's veganism, socialism, you know, anti-racism, anti-fascism, etc., etc. The other terms, globalists, progressives, liberals, well, actually globalists and progressives, they're just different terms for the same thing. It's all Marxism. It's all pretty much the same thing. And again, that's part of the problem. How can we solve a problem if people don't know what to call it and they keep changing the damn names? So globalists and progressives, sometimes people use the term globalists when they're talking about, you know, people like your George Soros types, or your Klaus Schwab or whatever, or Ursula von der Leyen or whatever, people who are the figureheads and public figures who are both rich and powerful economically, and they support this open borders world, right? But it's all essentially, there's all essentially the same ideology. Liberals, so liberals, I put that there, that's actually a misnomer, and I talk about this all the time. Stop calling this liberalism or neoliberalism. It isn't, right? It's not liberalism, it's international. We're in the mess we're in because of international revolutionary Marxism, right? Liberalism, to quickly go over it, traditional liberalism, yes, you know, people can argue it's changed, but liberalism doesn't explain why we're dealing with a pandemic of crazy revolutionary activism. It doesn't explain the control of, you know, the hate speech control. It doesn't explain the NGO complex. It doesn't explain a whole bunch of things
So it's not liberalism, and unfortunately a lot of people haven't caught on to that. It's Marxism. The next one down, nihilists, anarchists, people who just don't really believe in anything. They're happy to see destruction, and those personality types. Well, anarchy is from the I think it's the Latin or the Greek anarchon, without rulers, right? Which sounds like a nice idea, a world without rulers, but in practice, someone has to run the show. And so anarchists are part of the problem here as well. They help to break down civilization because they think it's a good idea. And the next category, psychopaths, sociopaths, degenerates, they're obviously linked to nihilists and anarchists. And by the way, people can be in several categories. One person can be everything on that left-hand side there, so we have to keep our minds open here. Degenerates, people with no sense of what's the correct way to behave socially and so on, right? So it could be degenerate sexual behavior and social behavior and so on. And the bottom left, and low consciousness or conscience. So I'll explain that. So this kind of drifts into what you might call spirituality, but it'll make total sense, and people use their own labels for this. It really means genuine intelligence, right? So this whole big mess we're in the world right now has shown there's a difference between people who are switched on, who understand what's happening, and who know the difference between right and wrong, and those who don't. And that's what this big struggle is over. It's not the poor against the rich. It's not white against black, or straight against gay, or man against woman. It's about who's got a high level of consciousness, who's got a low level of consciousness. Now, people on the left, anyone who supports internationalist globalism and all its destruction, is someone of a low level of consciousness. They've got a low level of awareness, and therefore they have a low level of conscience. They don't understand the difference between right and wrong. And before I continue as well, people might be confused by this table because they might say, well, I'm centre right, socially, or I'm more towards the right socially, but economically I'm liberal, and I believe in, less government interference, and it starts getting very confusing. But I'm talking about how people stand in terms of all this crazy globalist open borders bullshit. That's really what this graph is all about, and that's all that matters, right? Economic considerations come second to all of this stuff, because if you participate in globalism, you won't have an economy sooner or later, and that's what Ireland and other countries are starting to find out. Right. So anyway, on the right hand side, I'll go over that quickly. So the right, quote unquote, people who call themselves nationalists fit into that category. They believe in the idea of a country being sovereign, making its own decisions, having a healthy amount of separation from the internationalist globalist system. That's essentially what nationalism is. That makes the good thing. The next one there, anti-globalist. That's just another term I threw in there. It means the same thing essentially. So then you've got traditionalists, some conservatives, and so on. So people who want to keep things pretty much the same way or how they've been traditionally. I say some conservatives because some people are conservative, and they might call themselves conservative, but they don't particularly understand what's happening and what they should or shouldn't oppose. So that's why I put that in there. Genuine patriots, more of the same thing. Libertarians, some. So that's because libertarians technically is the idea of having minimal government interference. For example, a lot of patriots in America would call themselves libertarians. Now, the reason why I put it a little bit lower down the charts is because, not that they're really put in any particular order generally, but I put libertarian further down because I, in my opinion, understanding Marxism quite well, being a libertarian is not going to be enough to stop Marxism, right? Just being willing to defend rights of your community and as yourself as an individual, or even your own country on a certain level, is not enough to deal with Marxism, which is why I don't put as much emphasis on that. On the bottom right then, high consciousness or conscience. So back to what I was talking about earlier, a person who understands how things work, who's got a genuine higher level of intelligence, tends to also have a highly developed conscience, and they know the difference between right and wrong. That's why many people in the world, you can call them patriots, you can call them nationalists, you can call them whatever you want. These people essentially are more intelligent than the Marxist cult members on the left, and they have a conscience. So for example, people who aren't brainwashed, who might call themselves nationalists or patriots, oppose mass immigration because it's a stupid idea and it causes nothing but destruction, and they know that ethically speaking it's wrong and it shouldn't be. Whereas those on the left, because they're brainwashed in such a way that they have a lower level of consciousness, lower level of conscience, and that's where the conflict comes from. One group has a sense of ethics and the other one doesn't, because they don't. Their sense of ethics has been amputated from their brains thanks to Marxist brainwashing. Now, what I really want to talk about is the middle category, because this is something I deal with all the time. And there's plenty of people who go into this category. What they're doing is they're not picking a side politically. They're not engaging politically for XYZ reasons, and we're going to list those right now. These people are extremely problematic, and I think it's ludicrous at this point in time, the 21st century, considering what's happening, that people are willing to sit in that middle group and oftentimes feel that they're intelligent or they've got a high level of consciousness when they're actually useless. They're not contributing anything at all. So I'll start at the very top, apathetic and lazy. So that's pretty straightforward. People who just don't seem to care what's going on, or they're lazy, they're not willing to take any sort of an action. The next level down, apolitical, disillusioned. These are people who don't think politics doesn't think politics is going to make any difference. They're disillusioned with the political system, and they've kind of switched off and they don't pay attention to that anymore. The next one down is cowards.
Sorry, yeah, just saw that one now there, Boyle. Difficult to be a conservative if you have no idea what you're conserving, maybe. Yeah, well, I know that term some people don't like it. It means different things in America, and there's all these different splits. But yeah, it is important to keep in mind what people are trying to preserve or protect, and to stop Marxism eroding, pretty much.
And low self-esteem types. So these are people who are just afraid. They're afraid to speak out. They're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of maybe even being stressed out by crazy Marxists or whatever. They're afraid of being physically assaulted, whatever it is. Unfortunately, these people, the intimidation coming from the so-called political left, the Marxist cult members, is effective on a lot of people, and people who don't have much confidence, who don't have much courage, are afraid to speak out, and they end up being neutralized. So they're in the neutral category because they are neutralized. They don't help the conflict at all. The next.
Does anyone remember, say, in Ireland a while ago, when they were calling people fascist and far right and Nazi and racist and stuff? It was so much more potent and effective for a while, and it did shut people up. But then it eventually started to wear off, and people started to get a bit more confident, and they realized that they were being silenced. Does anyone in the comments remember that? Things have changed. So even 7 or 8 years ago, people were much more worried about being called fascist, far right, Nazi than they are now. And that's a good thing, but it just kind of sums up that the Marxist camp are very, very good at using tactics. They have a long, long tradition of using different tactics to coerce and to get their own way. And if you try and get in their way, they'll intimidate you, make you shut you up, get you fired from your job, all this stuff. But their tactics sometimes only work for a little while, and then they wear off, like someone cast a spell. And it's great to see in Ireland people are less concerned about that than they used to be. And it's the same in Western countries as well. But unfortunately, again, like I was saying, you're up against a movement that knows how to repackage, come up with new tactics. They have loads of tricks in the bag, but they come up with new ones constantly, and people need to stay on top of it. And before I let this play, I always think it's kind of like dealing with these Marxists is like an antivirus software on a computer. If you have a good program, not the one that comes with Windows, but get a decent antivirus software, when you get the program, when you fire it up, often it needs to update its definitions, right? That's because new viruses are appearing on the internet all the time. So it needs to have a database of all the ones that come out before and all the new ones that are coming out for it to do its job properly, right? Marxism is the same. There's been so many different strains of it in the past, so many different interpretations, so many different tactics, and they're always coming out with new ones. And that's why I'm always saying people are way behind with this stuff. You're never going to get a nationalist movement up and running if people don't know about Marxist subversion and conspiracy. That's another reason why people have to learn about this. They want nationalism to win. The first reason is that
the more you suppress Marxism and make that weird, and keep that pressed down and keep that out of affairs, the more people move towards nationalism. That's the first reason why we want to learn about Marxism. The second reason is because of what I just said a minute ago, that they're very, very good at derailing, using subversion, using entryism, where they join enemy groups, political parties and whatnot to derail them. They've got all these tricks. And when I'm looking at the nationalist movement in Ireland, there's a lot of people who, they might be turning up a protest, they might be waving flags, they might not like there's too many foreigners in the country and all these different things, and they seem to be more or less right wing, but they don't have a clue at all about what they're up against in terms of that they're a bit naive. They don't quite seem to understand what they're up against, and that there's a whole movement in Ireland of all these brainwashed lefties who are going to try to derail them and cause. Sometimes people get a shock, getting involved with the political right in Ireland. It's not till you get a bit deeper into it that you see, my God, these nut jobs are trying to stop us. And these people are Irish. They'd be 100% ethnically Irish names or whatever, grew up in Ireland. There's Irish as the next person, but in their heart and their soul, they're actually Marxists. They're brainwashed, and they are, these people are not at all like your average everyday person in Ireland at all. They're different. They're in a cult, and that's what makes them so dangerous.
Section down is very interesting. Conspiracy types. Now, confession time. When I was younger, I was interested in conspiracy stuff, and I studied all sorts of different subjects, and I kind of was probably fit into that category. So conspiracy types often think that the left and right are controlled by the elites, quote unquote, or secret societies. So interestingly, the concept of the elites are like an internationalist bourgeoisie, right, which again comes from Marxism. So the idea that there's a few people in charge running the whole show, and that it doesn't matter whether you pick left or right politically, it's not going to make any difference. So these conspiracy types. Another example is people, actually got one in mind who I won't mention by name, an Irish analyst who still talks about the Freemasons and stuff like that. This is incredibly problematic, and I've got a tremendous amount of knowledge on secret societies because I studied into that for years, so I will go toe-to-toe with anyone on that subject, but yet I'm not talking about it today. Why not? Because it doesn't help. That's why. A lot of people don't want to hear about that stuff, so they're not going to listen to you, but also it's not as high in the priority list as Marxism. So, secret societies, I'm talking about, the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the York Rite Freemasonry, the Illuminati, the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Church of Satan, the Knights of Malta. You go on all day about that subject, and it doesn't produce results. And those people conspiracy types are a big problem because they think they're being higher intelligence and higher knowledge, but they're not actually helping at all, and they're just wasting time and energy talking about that stuff. The next category.
Yeah, that kind of ties into what I was talking about earlier, is that it's already a struggle. You're looking at, say, the nationalist movement in Ireland. There's a lot of people now concerned about what's happening. They're very, I started out earlier talking about how difficult it is to get organised and so on. And to keep people focused on what the objective is, it's to have a strong, powerful nationalist movement that could potentially, start to turn things around, to change society, to get in positions of power. And we've got some people in society are still talking about stuff like secret societies, the Freemasons and things like that. There's no point. It's just outsourcing blame. Like I've been saying for a while, everyone in Ireland, including myself, have sleepwalked into this globalist situation. It didn't just fall from the sky. It goes back to, how far back do you want to go? It goes right back into history, but how people have only started to notice it recently. Why is that? Well, there's a few reasons why, but it's a creeping type of Fabian socialist type communism, where the society is slowly turning towards communistic ideas like open borders, world government, and Ireland being a member state of the world. So this has been happening progressively over the decades. The culture has been changing. Where has everybody been? Like, what was everybody doing that they only start to notice recently? And have you all, some of you noticed, especially been around a few decades, you've noticed how the water is kind of now up around people's necks, and now they're really starting to react. Whereas how did it get this far? It got this far because people were living their lives, and we were all growing up in this world where we thought we kind of got complacent, and we thought everything was probably just going to be okay, or we were wrapped up in our own personal lives. We weren't really thinking about bigger picture stuff too much, or else we were looking at it in the wrong way, like myself. And while all that was going on, this movement, people brainwashed with this shit, have been getting into government, have been getting into the media, have been getting into the education system, have been, agreeing with their other brainwashed friends in other countries, have been pushing this stuff on our society, and things are now out of control, and now people are starting to react. But yeah, I know what you mean there, boily, muddying the waters. Yeah, it's the whole confusion thing, and people being not being quite sure about what's going on. And this movement are up against our experts at deflection. It's propaganda. It's get people to talk about anything but what the real problem is. So you look at Ireland, there's something I'm going to put on the table here. I think it's called Occam's razor. It's the idea that if you're trying to figure something out and you've got several explanations for it, usually the more simple one is the correct one. But when it comes to conspiracy theory types and all that stuff, they try to look for the alternative or unusual explanation for what's going on rather than the simple one. And when you think of communism, communism has quite a CV in the stuff that it's done in the past, all through the 20th century. Yet despite all of that, when you ask people what's wrong today, they will say the globalist bankers or secret societies and stuff like that. They reach for the unusual explanation. There's a man behind the curtain or whatever. They're either unaware or they're completely forgotten that we have this dangerous ideology in the world. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, disorientation, obfuscation. Yeah. And again, there's all these word games and things to distort people's perceptions of reality and keep them divided and so on. I'll let this play.
Down are quite related. And again, people can fit into many categories at once, right? On the left, on the right, or in the middle, But the key point to mention is that people who on the left who identify with Marxism and are committed to that, it's pretty straightforward what they are. They're part of the problem. Whereas people on the right who identify as being nationalists or patriots are part of the solution. So that much you can kind of count on. But besides that, people can fit into several categories at once. So spiritual, awakened, new age types, again, an area I've got personal experience with myself. People who are interested in stuff like, meditation, the chakras, all that type of stuff that kind of detaches you from reality, right? Where you're kind of thinking there might be an afterlife, or there's other levels of existence, and it kind of takes you out of the present and makes you think, well, there's no point getting involved in issues and what's happening in the world because it's all just transient. I don't mean sexually. I mean transient as in it's going to come and go and it's no big deal and we shouldn't engage with it. So there's plenty of people in the world in that category, and really a lot of them are just hedonists. They're people who they again like I was saying before, I'll go toe to toe with anyone on these subjects and I have plenty of experience in them, but a lot of them in my experience are people who are just hedonists. They're involved in spirituality because they want to find new ways to feel good, right? They're just hedonistic. They're just about pleasure. There's nothing really intelligent and higher intelligence about them or higher consciousness at all, right? In fact, if you look at the bottom right of the graph, high consciousness and conscience, the people in the spiritual awakened new age category think that they're higher conscious and higher conscience, but they're not. And I can prove it because, and again, personal experience here, there's nothing higher consciousness or intelligence. There's nothing higher intelligent about not helping to oppose evil in the world today and actually standing up and being counted. There's nothing intelligent about that at all. So all those people sitting around the world right now, I'm not denying that meditation and spirituality can make you feel better, make you feel more calm, make you develop as a character a little bit, but it doesn't really produce any results outside of yourself in any major way. And people can spend their whole lives in that section there and contribute nothing. So that group is definitely a problem. And also I put there as well, pacifist brainwashing. That's a big problem. And I talked about this earlier. People who think we're going to get out of this mess by singing Kumbaya or just kind of meditating or trying to be positive. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with Marxism, looking over the history, conflict is inevitable. So pacifists are a big problem because, well, the rest of us are saying, you know, I think we need to actually stand up and fight for our rights here, and things might get a bit nasty. They'll be sitting there going, no, we have to be peaceful at all costs and so on. And obviously, if you're in the middle of a war and you're talking about peace, your enemy is going to steamroller over you without a second's hesitation. So they're a problem. Also, as well, I've talked about my work that
I'm sure maybe some of you noticed as well how this this middle category here you can see the mouse there, this spirituality and stuff ties in with the woke thing. You know, that's where part of where the label comes from. That there's a lot of this goes back to the idea that some of the Marxists have been pushing, particularly people like Leon Trotsky, or aka Lev Bronstein, one of the chief guys of the Bolshevik takeover of Russia in 1917. People like him and Marx as well, they talked about how, like, being part of there's such a thing as an awakened person, right? A spiritually evolved, a woke individual, and that woke person wants to be part of a world collective. You know, wants to be a spiritually enlightened, compassionate person who's against oppression, who feels solidarity and connectedness with people around the world. In fact, the United Nations, another Marxist entity, is pushing a lot of this crap through the education system. And say people like Jana London will tell you about, you know, the trans stuff and some of the weird stuff being taught in the schools, that a lot of it's coming through the United Nations UNESCO templates. So the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization are pushing this kind of woke stuff. It's the idea that you go along with global revolution, you're an evolved being, right? There was a magazine called the what's it called? The New Statesman was a magazine created by the Fabian Society. It's a British socialist magazine, and I think it was that magazine featured an image of like the mind, you know, like with a light bulb in it, you know, the lighting a light in the minds of men. You know, that's what this ideology is claiming to do. So there's a connection here. Now, ignore the graph for a minute, just kind of reminded me of it, but this category here, the woke version, could be over on the left. You know, people they actually feel it. That's why when you're dealing with the so-called lefties, and you try and reason with them, and you say, can you not see the mass immigration is bad for your country? What about the rise in crime? What about the pressure on the services, like, you know, hospital beds, housing, jobs, and so on? They think that they are evolved and you're not. They think they've got a superior conscience and they know what's best for society. There's a tremendous amount of hubris here, like tremendous amount of ego with these people. That's why we're talking about earlier how brainwashed is somebody. Sometimes you're wasting your time. They think they have it all figured out, particularly when they come up at you with the, you know, the bright eyes and the smiley faces with these revolutionary ideas. They've no idea that they're brainwashed, but they genuinely believe that they're an evolved being and you're not.
It's important for us to try to protect Christianity and to protect, because it's a pillar of Western civilization, and we should keep religiosity in society because Marxism wants to destroy it because it's a rival. But having said all that, I do have my criticism of people who are religious sometimes. Some people, in Ireland included, erroneously think that they can get out of this by praying and by being religious. That's not true, again, because when you look at the history of Marxism, it's shown that being religious isn't enough. Say for Christians, tens of millions of Christians have been killed by this ideology, and their praying isn't what saved them. The only thing that saved them was using guns and warfare, right? That's what stopped them from, saved them in many cases. An example would be the Spanish Civil War, when the clergy took up weaponry against the communists, against the Spanish cult members there. So, you know, I'm not knocking religion and saying you shouldn't pray, but some people think just by praying and being religious they're going to get out of this mess. Nonsense. Absolute rubbish. You have to understand Marxism and oppose it and understand how to fight it and pray on top of that. That's how you get out of this mess. The next one, the immature, hedonistic, egotistical, vaxxed, etc. So I added vaxxed in there. So I'll explain that in a second. But the immature, hedonistic, egotistical, and it's normal when you're growing up to be egotistical or hedonistic and to want to have fun and all that stuff. But unfortunately, if you stay in that frame of mind and that's your only, you know, purpose for being, your raison d'etre, if you're going to be in that point of view all the time, you're not really helping, because you're all about yourself and you're not willing to fight and contribute and make sacrifices. You're all about feeling good and having pleasure. And again, back to what I was saying earlier, when you're in a war, if you just, and we are in a war, if you just think about what pleasure you're getting in life, it's all too easy for people to kind of choose the easy road to avoid conflict and so on, because it makes them feel more comfortable. And obviously it's no coincidence that nowadays we are being conditioned into being, social media junkies and dopamine and serotonin, junkies, with our little fixes every day on social media and our Netflix and all this stuff, because it keeps us in this nice, warm, amniotic existence where everything feels comfortable and nice. And that obviously puts you in the neutral category, because you're not willing to engage in conflict. I put vaxxed in there at the end because, in my opinion, I've noticed everyone I know who's been vaccinated has shown some signs of brain damage or some sort of behavioural lacking, shall we say, or a lack of could they've been neutralised essentially by their behaviour. That's something we should keep an eye on. I think that.
Sure. Let me know, anyone listening in, about the the vax stuff and so on. Many people have some sort of a story or whatever, a case to do with what happened post the vaccine. I'm always interested in what happened there, the effects on people and so on.
One of the things that happened with the vax was that the vax, like I predicted, one of the things it does is make people go along with this new world order globalist thing. So I would put those in that category. People who are literally doped, they've allowed themselves to become doped up with injections, and now they're away with the fairies half the time and are not willing to engage with what's going on and actually get involved here. The next one down is very important: over intellectual types. I see.
Well, with the vaccine stuff, like I mentioned earlier, that one of the effects of the vaccines, in addition to it threw the mortality rate up. Obviously, it killed a lot of people, but also it triggered off miscarriages in women. And I think another thing as well, I don't know if there's been any evidence of this yet, but I bet you there will be an increase of people, thinking that they're trans or whatever because of what was in the vaccines. That's one of my things I was speculating on as well. Like, apparently that a lot of the vaccines were tested and there was different types of materials in them. Like, not all the vaccine from the different companies were the same. So I reckon that there was like a lot of stuff put in them as well that, again, would be part of the agenda to weaken the West. And that links into eugenics as well, and population levels and so on.
This all the time, especially when you look at the political dichotomy of left and right. This can be a long, protracted conversation with people, and they start talking about, well, like, who is left and who is right, and this group was right in some ways, but left in the other ways, and they start analysing all this over and over, and they feel that it's quite intelligent. But the bottom line is, are they reaching the conclusion that nationalism is the only way to go and the way to get out of this mess? If they're not reaching that conclusion, they're not very intelligent. And they could write a book about this, they could be doing public lectures, they could be a famous content creator or a politician or whatever. If after analysing all this stuff, they're still not willing to see that nationalism is the way out of this, they are just not an intelligent person at all. So I think over-intellectualism can be a big problem, particularly if people have gone through university. I've talked before about the potency of Marxist indoctrination. The universities are a big part of that, in that they push Marxist brainwashing. So oftentimes a lot of people who've come through the academic system are a lot more brainwashed and contaminated than other people realise, or perhaps even they themselves realise. At the very bottom it says this column needs to move to the.
I deal with that a lot, when I'm doing my thing and trying to spread awareness about Marxist brainwashing. There's a lot of not just university students, but graduates. That can happen as well. But even just people in general in society are interested in bigger picture affairs. There's an awful lot of, it's like the world is going to hell and Western civilization is collapsing because of people's egos. If people don't want to be told that they've been off the mark or doing things wrong, they don't want to take that criticism. Egos can come into play with people, and they don't want to have to reevaluate their beliefs. Now, this is something that we all have to go through in this life. I've humiliated myself loads of times and made mistakes in terms of my beliefs and so on, and I had to suck it up. I had to accept that I was wrong and reevaluate myself and question my own beliefs and so on. Clearly, that's an important life skill to have, and you can always tell when you meet people if they've done that or not, if they've actually evolved and willing to reevaluate their beliefs. I mentioned the being obsessed with Zionism earlier, and the Jews and stuff as being an example of what I'm talking about. Another mistake I made in the past, and it takes guts for someone, particularly when they get older, to look at their beliefs and say, am I wrong? Is this really the best stance to take? Does it actually improve things? Does it help the situation? So on. Do I need to tweak my beliefs a little bit? It takes quite a lot of guts to do that. I think people struggle with that one myself. I will just read through some of the comments on YouTube here. Yeah. Ian McGilchrist's work. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. It might ring a bell, but I get a lot of names thrown at me. If you want to send me a link or drop a link in here, you should be able to do that. If it's any decent, I might even bring it up on the screen. But yeah, just let me know who that is first and what they do. But let's play on with this.
Right. So if you could get those people in the middle to get them to stop with those bad habits, particularly the young, to not let young people drift into those habits where they become useless and they're not willing to pick a side. They need to move to the right, and we need to start doing that as patriots and nationalists around the world, because the political left have been doing it for years, trying to bring those in the middle are not involved in politics over to the left side. And this is why the Marxist cult is winning, because they're very good at that. So we need to actively start to move people over to the right hand side.
That's one of the reasons why I was saying one of the benefits, before I move on, one of the benefits of creating this mentality, educating people that it's Marxist brainwashing is what's causing all the trouble. Even though that is the case, a lot of people aren't talking about it. They don't even know that it exists or what it is. Yet they care about what's going on and they're analysing stuff constantly, but they haven't caught on to that much. And what I'm trying to argue with my work the last while is the more people develop this hostile attitude towards Marxism, the better chance you have of limiting its impact on society, getting it out, and it'll stop being such a problem across the board. And yeah, so let me just look back here. Okay, no worries. Yeah, I'll make a note of that. Look into it. Cheers.
And this is why the Marxist cult is winning, because they're very good at that. So we need to actively start to move people over to the right-hand side. There's another kind of problem I'm seeing across the West, and obviously being Irish, I can see this in Ireland. So the victim mentality. The population of a given country that's being forced to go globalist can easily fall into the trap of victimhood, aka being oppressed. They may then project blame onto external parties and organisations for the situation they are in, the United Nations, the European Union, the World Economic Forum, their governments, corporations, international banking, international finance capital, the banking elites, the NGO complex, or for the Americans, the non-profits complex, the royals, royal families, the George Soros types, the internationalist globalist billionaire types, the mainstream media, the migrants, Islam and Muslims, secret societies, Freemasons, Illuminati, and obviously Zionism as well at the end. So you can see some images there. The World Economic Forum on the top left, the United Nations top right, the World Health Organization, which is a sub-organization of the UN, the European Union, there's George Soros, and obviously the Star of David as well. So people often, you'll see them blaming these other groups, and I underlined government. So people, say you pick a country like Ireland, they won't really blame Irish people. They will blame the governments. They will blame all these external factors, and they won't blame themselves enough, which is part of the problem, I think. Now, this is not to say that I'm saying that people in Ireland who oppose globalism now should blame themselves for globalism. I don't mean that. I mean, there's a portion of the Irish population who are contributing to globalism, and they are more of a problem than these external groups and factors, including the government. This is a point I always stress in my work, that the problem is who in the general population is brainwashed into supporting Marxism. Because remember, if you had a population of 80 or 90% of people who are nationalistic minded, there's no way that the state or any of these external groups would even try to control the country or make it go globalist, because they would be told no in certain terms to fuck off. So All that matters is who's brainwashed in the country and who isn't, and it's a bad idea to blame external factors or external groups all the time and project blame, especially towards the government. The government is a reflection of the lack of ideological health.
Yeah, that's a big one, and I was talking about that earlier as well, as like I said, people not looking around them within their society. So one of the things that nationalist movement say in Ireland has, it's not all about Ireland, it's not all about nationalism, this is a global thing, but I'm just using Ireland as an example. You look at, there's plenty of, say, enthusiasm, right, of people saying we need to have more nationalism to try to get people more on board with the movement. That much is understood, but the bit that's missing is people aren't looking around them enough for who is challenging the people around them for being, in favour of open borders and so on, and explain to people that this is all Marxist in origin and it's destructive for their countries. That's the bit that needs to be worked on more, I think.
All that matters is who's brainwashed in the country and who isn't, and it's a bad idea to blame external factors or external groups all the time and project blame, especially towards the government. The government is a reflection of the lack of ideological health in the country. So to add on to that, this mentality, this victim mentality, is common in Marxism-contaminated countries that have a colonial past, since they can claim oppression. In Ireland, this has traditionally been directed at the British Empire's occupation and or the Catholic Church. Having a victim-oppressed mentality is a symptom of Marxist indoctrination. So the idea that we are oppressed, or we've been oppressed, that idea comes from Marxism. And my work in analysing the countries all around the world who have been contaminated with Marxism, Ireland is a bit unique because it's a Western European, primarily Caucasian country, with a traditionally Caucasian country, a traditionally Catholic country who's been under colonial rule. So it makes it a little bit different from, say, African countries or South American countries and so on. And this victim mentality has been a big part of Irish culture going back. It's actually part of the Irish psyche now. So really, and this is the big thing at the bottom, ultimately, a country's population should take responsibility for its current collective situation itself, to take responsibility for its ideological health or lack thereof. That's something that the Irish people can control by how they act socially, by what they condemn, what they support, and so on. Rather than trying to blame the governments or external forces, realise that it's the people around you who are supporting globalism, or more to the point, the people around you who are not passionate about nationalism. They are the problem. And even you'll see in the comments of this video, you'll see plenty of examples, as on previous videos, you'll see plenty of examples of brainwashed Marxists criticising, trying to deconstruct, dismissing this video, calling it propaganda and so on. They're the problem. They're the problem more than governments. The governments are just a reflection of the state of disunity within the population.
Yeah, there was something I wanted to add there about, what was it about, just get this back to this bit here. Where are we?
Saying that people in Ireland are globalists, that idea comes from Marxism. And my work in analysing the countries all around the world who have been contaminated with Marxism, Ireland is a bit unique because it's a Western European, primarily.
That's what I was going to say. What I was going to say was, one other kind of problems I noticed in people not being able to get this stuff fully, and what the real issue is probably because when people go and call themselves nationalist and they say they're for their country and being preserved and the ethnic group and the culture, and they want to control the borders, and they want their people to be respected and have a good quality of life, and they don't want other groups coming in and destroying all that. I get all that, and maybe part of that is what I'm saying is that we've got a problem within Irish people that needs to be addressed. And I think for maybe some people who call themselves nationalists, they find that hard to digest emotionally, because they call themselves a patriot or nationalist, they're not comfortable with the idea of criticising their fellow countrymen and women. But the thing is, you have to separate. You have to realise that when it comes to Marxist brainwashing, it turns people into anti-patriots who are against their own nation, their own kind. You know, they might, like I said, they could grow up. I said this on an Irish Space last week. They could, you know, grow up. They could be from the same part of Dublin as you, or Cork as you are, similar accent, grew up in Ireland, lived in Ireland their whole lives, a very Irish name, but if they're contaminated with Marxism, they're actually anti-Irish. And they could be even a decent person in so many ways, but, you know, we have to look at them as being a problem for society, and they should be kept away from positions of influence. They certainly should be kept away of being in charge of education and influencing the minds of the young. And I think a lot of people who call themselves nationalists are probably uncomfortable with this stuff, because they have to start criticizing the people around them. And looking at the screen here, it's much more easier on the emotions and more convenient for people to blame some boogeyman outside of the country, like the World Economic Forum, or George Soros, or the Jews, the Zionist movement, or the European Union. These are, you know, can be all problems, of course, but in your own country in Ireland, the big problem is Irish people who are either helping the globalist agenda or not helping to fight it. And to highlight this problem requires us looking around us at our family members, our friends, our neighbours, work colleagues, people in society all around us who might be just as Irish as anyone else, but they are part of the problem. And I think a lot of people find that hard to accept. And another thing on this subject I really resist is you hear other ideas like it's the people versus the government. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's clearly that's not the case. The general public are not all aligned against the system. There's many divisions and people don't agree with each other. That's part of it. Or other ones like it's the poor against the rich. No, it isn't. That's more Marxist talk. You do hear some people talking that way. I won't mention any names, but people who are like, you know, working class type representatives, you hear the Marxist rhetoric coming out. They're missing the bullseye as well. It's not about rich or the poor or the working class people against the bourgeoisie or the middle class. No, that's not it. Again, it's who is brainwashed and who isn't, and who's supporting globalism and who is. Just like with that graph I showed you earlier on, you know, it's all that matters.
Marxist indoctrination. So the idea that we are oppressed, or we've been oppressed, that idea comes from Marxism. And my work in analysing the countries all around the world who have been contaminated with Marxism, Ireland is a bit unique because it's a Western European, primarily Caucasian country, with a traditionally Caucasian country, a traditionally Catholic country who's been under colonial rule. So it makes it a little bit different from, say, African countries or South American countries and so on. And this victim mentality has been a big part of Irish culture going back. It's actually part of the Irish psyche now. So really, and this is the big thing at the bottom, ultimately, a country's population should take responsibility for its current collective situation itself, to take responsibility for its ideological health or lack thereof. That's something that the Irish people can control by how they act socially, by what they condemn, what they support, and so on. Rather than trying to blame the governments or external forces, realise that it's the people around you who are supporting globalism, or more to the point, the people around you who are not passionate about nationalism. They are the problem. And even you'll see in the comments of this video, you'll see plenty of examples, as on previous videos, you'll see plenty of examples of brainwashed Marxists criticising, trying to deconstruct, dismissing this video, calling it propaganda and so on. They're the problem. They're the problem more than governments. The governments are just a reflection of the state of disunity within the population.
Yeah, I hate that stuff. You know, I hate another problem with all this is people outsourcing blame onto others. Is that, like I was saying earlier, there's no point in just constantly talking about this shit constantly and just complain about what's going on. I don't think anyone wants to spend the rest of our lives doing that. I mean, I don't, but I mean, it can be fun sometimes to analyze what's going on, but surely the point of all this is to go and take action that would turn things around, you know? So like I was saying earlier, is the priority not to focus on having the nationalist movement organised, like I was saying earlier, for tactical reasons? It needs to be a strong coalition or a very strong singular group or a very strong coalition to actually turn things around. It's much more efficient to talk about that problem sort out the ideological mess, get everyone on the same page with a clean, marketable form of nationalism, and then you can start to turn things around. And part of that is to be anti-Marxist for the reasons I said. It's much more efficient to take this stance than to spend all your time complaining about what globalism is doing. Like, there's too many foreigners, Islam is getting more brazen, there's trans in the school, look, there's a two-tier policing system, look, the lefties are trying to change the constitution, or there's not enough houses, we've got a housing crisis. These are just complaining about the effects of globalism. Now what people do is they tell themselves that it's a good thing to act that way and talk about this stuff because you're raising awareness. I think that's been overused. I think we've done enough of that now. I think it's actually counterproductive and a waste of time to just constantly bitch about the negative effects of what's going on and to just constantly cycle in that. And that's why everybody's different. But me personally, you won't see me making a typical reaction video about humdrum stuff that other content creators are doing, because it's been done to death and it's not going to make any difference. I'm trying to get at here is I think there's a tremendous amount of bad habits involved, not just in Ireland but across the West, that need to stop because they don't produce results, essentially.
So this bit here is getting right down to it. The core root problem in your country is that it has an infection of the internationalist revolutionary Marxist ideology. Mass immigration, radical sex ed and sexual perversion, the insane state propaganda and the media stuff, hate speech laws, feminism, abortion, the green agenda, breakdown of law and order, veganism, etc. These are all symptoms of infection. They're not the problem. They're all symptoms of the problem. They're all symptoms of an ideological infection. This core problem in your country exists. That is the problem of being infected with Marxism. This core problem in your country exists because the indigenous, normally resident people have, or have had historically, a suicidal lack of hostility towards this toxic foreign ideology. This is the foundational problem, and all the other listed major problems we are experiencing right now stem from this one. So this is the thing that's been causing problems in the background the whole time, and now it's at this point now when the water is starting to rise up around people's necks and the wheels are starting to come off the wagon in the big way. We're seeing the breakdown of law and order, we're seeing the breakdown of society, we're seeing these problems just getting worse and worse and worse. It's at this point now, still people can't see that revolutionary Marxist activism was the problem all along, and that's the reason why we're part of the European Union and we can't control our borders, and why when you try to speak out against this stuff you're being suppressed and stifled every step of the way. It's Marxism is the cause here. Since anti-sovereignty, pro-globalist internationalist Marxism and anti-globalist pro-sovereignty nationalism are opposed, a population needs to choose the latter en masse to break free from victimhood and the globalist system. This would be my highest recommendation here, is that again we need to get as many people to push towards nationalism as possible to then overwhelm the other side with weight of numbers. And back to the graph earlier, we need to get all the people not engaged in the middle and push them over to the right to start choosing nationalism, not being afraid to call racist and fascist and so on, and to start moving towards nationalism. That's going to be the way to get out of this mess.
Actually, I want to add something before I forget here. Something I talked about a lot is that Ireland actually has a lot in common with African countries, because in the 20th century, not ethnically or culturally, but in terms of what happened to us in the 20th century, because we emerged from being under the control of a European colonial power into moving in towards the internationalist system. And unfortunately, Ireland was fertile ground for becoming contaminated with Marxist thinking, because if you know Marxism, they love to bitch about the imperialism of other groups. So they talk about how a religion is oppressive, how the Catholic Church built up its power by oppressing people and so on. And they'll talk about British imperialism, European colonial imperialism, and that's actually why Africa went to hell in a handbasket in the 20th century, because they convinced people that they'd be better off getting their freedom and having liberation from the European powers, but they just went towards communism instead. So it was freedom, all right, yeah, it was freedom to be free and go and be Marxist. And a similar thing happened in Ireland too, that Marxist thinking started to enter Ireland in the late 1800s, and it started to gather pace in the early 20th century. And that's why eventually you look at groups like the Irish Republican Army, whatever they started out as, they eventually went Marxist, because it's about fighting against the empire, and Northern Ireland became battleground then. In 1920s onwards, there was collusion between the Soviets and the IRA, taking arms and money off the Soviets and so on, because the Soviets wanted to spread the revolution. A lot of this stuff is uncomfortable for Irish people to look at. But what I'm getting at here is that I'm not saying I'm against Irish people being sovereign and run their own country, but I'm just saying that it's Ireland's fertile ground for Marxist brainwashing, because we were oppressed or ruled by others in the past. And that's why you won't really hear me talking about Irish history too much. I don't think it's very constructive to swim around in this we're oppressed kind of mentality.
So Marxism is HIV for countries, and this is a great quote from the chess legend and political activist Garry Kasparov from Winter is Coming 2015. Quote, communism is like an autoimmune disorder. It doesn't do the killing itself, but it weakens the system so much that the victim is left helpless and unable to fight off anything else. So Marxism does to nations what the HIV virus does to the human body. It's not the actual virus that kills a person. However, it may neutralize the immune system, rendering it ineffective. A HIV person may be diagnosed with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS. A person can then die of multiple causes that would, under normal circumstances, be dealt with by the immune system. Essentially, an ineffective immune system leads to a weakened, vulnerable organism. If a country is an organism, then its immune system is its sense of uniqueness, traditions, patriotism, religiosity, culture, etc. As we've seen, the cult ideology erodes and eventually neutralizes these elements. Once this immune system is removed from the equation, the organism nation is then wide open to attack.
That's what happened to Ireland.
Not only does Marxism break down the wall that protects the nation, it invites in dangerous pathogens, the various Marxian sub-agendas, feminism, mass immigration, LGBTQ, trans, economy-destroying climate change activism, etc., and their effects. Its obsession with destroying nations is evident in its own stances on these issues. It fanatically supports these sub-agendas regardless of their nation-destroying effects. So the Marxist ideology, that is, we can see its attitude towards nations and so on by the things that it supports. The Marxist cult ideology, in a sense, is a diseased wrecking ball for a nation's perimeter wall. And I mean that both symbolically and literally if we include a country's international border. So it literally breaks down the border, symbolic border wall around the country, and allows it to be destroyed. I'm going to do a separate presentation on the European Union soon, but this is a big one really when you're thinking, okay, of all the crazy revolutionary activism and different Marxist sub-agendas in the world right now, which is the one causing the most damage? And most people in the West could agree that mass immigration is the big issue. If you want to destroy a country, you want to break down civilization, moving, massive amounts of people into a country is definitely going to do it. So you're looking at a country like Ireland. What's the big problem here? Why is it that you have all these people who are against it, and there's a certain portion of the population who don't have a problem with mass immigration, who are brainwashed, but anyone else is opposed to it? Why is it that the government is being so stubborn and refusing to relent and wants to keep pushing this regardless and coming up with new schemes and trying to get away with this no matter what? When a country like Ireland, it's a member of the European Union, so from a legal, technical, governmental point of view, it doesn't have the ability to stop bringing in migrants because it's part of the European Union. So the European Union is a big, big problem. So Ireland must leave the European Union ASAP. We can have control of our nation, including control of our borders, or EU membership, but not both. Economic considerations are secondary to national collapse and the breakdown of civilization. Globalist mass immigration inevitably leads to economic ruin through demographic overloading anyway. So your economy is going to be destroyed anyway if you go down this road. So people who are saying we can't leave the European Union for economic reasons, this is nonsense. We would find ways to survive it, but there's no way the country's going to survive staying in the EU and bringing in all these migrants.
You hear people saying that a lot, don't you, when you talk about leaving the EU? One of their arguments is about the economic stuff, and they say, well, look at Brexit. But I mean, would you rather just be swept away, and would you prefer that, or would you rather take the hard road and try and get out and try and deal with the economic problems as they arise? Obviously, this stuff is still a pipe dream. That's further down the tracks than what I was talking about earlier. But if you imagine nationalists being involved, getting out of the European Union would be a top priority, and they would have quite a lot of work to do when it comes to economic stuff.
European Union, pan-European movements had multicultural intentions. So again, I'll do this in a separate presentation talking about Mr. Kalergi, the Kalergi Plan, and the Pan-Europa movement, and Praktischer Idealismus and his books and so on in a separate presentation. To put this directly to people who haven't caught on to this yet, the European Union was created to do what it's doing now, which is to try to create this Marxist open borders shithole. That's what it was created. Kalergi was a Marxist cult member himself. You can tell that by his writings. The European Union was created for that reason, and it's doing exactly what it was supposed to do. None of this is a crisis. This was the way the European Union was designed. It's not a conspiracy. It's just ideology. They just don't believe in the idea of countries having borders. They believe in a multi-ethnic, monocultural, multicultural entity, rather than all these separate countries. So leaving the EU must be the top priority of nationalist parties across the continent. And you will have a chorus of Marxist cult members in Ireland and elsewhere.
Actually, before that moves on, I just want to say that people often bring up Kalergi and the Kalergi Plan, and they quote bits from his work sometimes, and they focus on the Jewish thing, and they want to go down that road, but they don't really just pointed out what it is that he's Marxist. And people talk about his book Praktischer Idealismus, or Practical Idealism, which was released in 1925, I think it was. So it was just after World War One. A lot of people back then were talking about how, the idea of preventing war again. They had the League of Nations and these ideas that we needed to have a world without borders to try and prevent war. And obviously Marxist ideas were connected in with that too. When people talk about Kalergi, they never point out that he was a Marxist. They just miss that bit when you read his book, again, because people don't have the knowledge. When they read Practical Idealism, they're looking for the Jewish connection. They're looking for what he said about people ethnically, and all the Marxist stuff just goes over their heads. I went through that book and I made notes. It was like 7 years ago, but he was undoubtedly 100% Marxist.
There's all the scare tactics and all the talk they can to say, we shouldn't leave the EU, to try to take the sting out of this movement. And they'll talk about Brexit as well and what happened there. By the way, just on Brexit as well, we can see that, before Brexit and after Brexit, there was always going to be the Marxist cult members in the UK who wanted Britain to stay, and it will do all they can to make that process painful. So my point is, leaving the European Union would not be as painful as we're led to believe. The only reason it's painful is because you have a bunch of Marxist cult member traitors in your country who are going to do all they can to derail the process, to punish you economically, to make you think it was a bad idea, and to set an example that no one else should leave the EU. So that's what's kind of went on there. So that's the end of this presentation.
Sorry, that's a bit of tiredness kicking in there. Thanks for letting me know. And just to wrap up, folks, I just had a really long day, but I decided to go ahead with this session anyway. But I don't know if I'll do another one next Sunday. And my work schedule is a bit weird. It's kind of on and off, 4 days on, 4 days off. It's a bit weird, and I've got to squeeze these in when I can. Some interesting interviews lined up. I won't announce the names just yet, but two pretty high-profile characters from involved with Irish nationalism and stuff. Now, I don't want to talk about nationalism all the time, but it's definitely one of my focus areas. And two great guests coming up soon, and looking forward to that. So they're great characters and high caliber guests, so I'll be doing my prep for those, and that's what I started out on, doing interviews. So anyone listening different platforms, make sure you follow me on X at ResolvingR. I'll stick the profile up on the screen here actually, and make sure you subscribe and all that good stuff. I'm back on the horse now with a home studio and all that crack, so we'll be doing regular enough content, X Spaces, live streams, videos and interview sessions as well. The website is resolvingr.com, and I'm gonna do a bit of a revamp on that. I did build the website myself. It's got some information about the book, but not much else on it because I kind of took a lot of stuff off it, but I'm thinking of getting that redone as well. But there is a page on the book, page on the website dedicated to the book if anyone's interested. So Red Pandemic, the book, Red Pandemic, the Global Marxist Cult. There's a page on the website dedicated to that. But I would highly recommend the presentation. It's also my pinned tweet on my profile as well, at ResolvingR on X. I went out tonight on, just added some more, using vMix here, adding some more profiles as I go along. So we went out, gone out live on X, YouTube, Rumble. Facebook didn't work out, but that was just a test. But also going out on Twitch as well, be adding more profiles too. And actually the Resolving Reality podcast, what I'll be doing as well is whenever I've got time, I'll just kind of be doing replays of some of the old archive episodes. They've been going down quite well. People appreciate those too. So one night I streamed 3 episodes of Resolving Reality Radio, which was what I did in 2018. So it was I did one interview with David Evans on climate change. Another one was with Dr. Quinta Van Meter about the trans movement, and another one was on an anti-feminist, had a discussion with her. So I'll be doing that on a regular basis too. So anyway, folks, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate the comments and the audio stuff, and throughout tonight, even right at the end, and checks and stuff at the start. Hope you enjoyed this, just a test tonight, and I kind of was so preoccupied with tech stuff and being busy with house chores and all this other crack that I've very little time to actually generate any content for the stream today. But I committed to it, and I just kind of decided to throw myself into it. But so the next one I'll be a bit more prepared, have some more takes for you and different things. So anyway, folks, thank you very much for listening and watching. Hope you have a good week ahead of you. I'm going to have a mental week, which is mostly about work. But I'm looking forward to my days off, probably Friday, and then from Friday onwards I'll be off a few days, and I'll be back with more content then. So thank you very much, folks, for listening and watching. I hope you have a good week.